Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 9 of SuperSports, the review series for the vehicles which are in the exotic category, are beyond normal sports cars, but not necessarily quite full-on supercars. And in this episode we're featuring what is arguably one of the best SuperSports models in the game. Now, it probably sounds like I say that about a lot of cars, but that's the case, usually. All cars are good at something, you just have to find out what it is. And this is the best, or one of the best, SuperSports models in one particular way. And that is its sheer straight line performance. In fact, the sheer straight line performance, especially top speed on this Mercedes, can rival even the best cars in the game. Not including the ridiculous unrealistic cars like the Red Bull or the Tomahawk, of course. Now, this car is powered by a 6-litre V12 engine. This is, of course, the SL65 AMG, which is the top of the line. So, as I said, 6-litre V12. When fully tuned, it's turbocharged, and it produces a massive 1,065 horsepower. And it produces all that power at just 5,500 RPM. So pretty low for a V12, but that's not uncommon for Mercedes-AMG models. They do typically go for quite American-styled engines, big, lazy, low-end power that just gives you that relentless shove through massive mid-range torque and power. Now, speaking of torque, again, very much like an American engine, this car actually produces more torque than power. It actually has one of the highest torque figures in the game at 1,092 pound-feet, which is an insane amount of torque. Now, that is of course going through the rear wheels, and 1,000 pound-feet of torque, 1,000 horsepower going through the rear wheels of a Mercedes doesn't exactly sound like a highly competitive car. Perhaps in a straight line, but that just sounds like a meteor. Fast in a straight line, but don't ask it to turn a corner. And that is also backed up by the fact that even with the full weight loss package, it's still a pretty heavy car at 1,506 kilos. So even after the weight loss package, it still weighs 1.5 tons. However, the power to weight ratio is extremely high. Not necessarily the highest, but for a car of its weight, it is surprisingly high. Primarily, of course, thanks to its overwhelming power. This car actually manages to put out 707 horsepower per tonne, which for a 1.5 tonne vehicle is pretty impressive. Now, the PP is perhaps, for such a heavy vehicle, surprisingly high at 637, and that's some serious PP territory. That's higher than the Toyota TS30 hybrid LMP car. So, a tall order to ask of a 1.5 tonne luxury super sports car. Now, as you'd expect, it's pretty pricey, but not as expensive as many of the other Merc models, and not as expensive in relation to how fast it is when compared to some of the other SLs, to be honest. All of the SL models are very expensive, but for the jump in performance that this version gives you, it's not that much more expensive. It sits at 190,000 credits, which is pretty decent considering how much power it has. And not just power, but as I alluded to earlier on, performance. Speaking of performance, this car has a top speed of almost 300 miles per hour, even without NOS or slipstream. That's fast. Even for an exotic vehicle, that is seriously fast. Completely unrealistic, of course, but fast nonetheless. Now, the acceleration is where this car differs a little bit from many other cars that are capable of those kind of speeds, because usually 300 mile per hour cars on Gran Turismo also have really strong acceleration. This car, not so much. Now, it's certainly not slow, but the uptake of power due to the best way of setting it up, which is the mid-range turbo, is a bit sluggish. Now, having such a huge amount of power and torque, it always catches up to pretty much any other super sports car top end, but it is pretty sluggish low end. Now, most people probably wouldn't run it in its fully tuned form as a track car anyway, so it's not like you really need to worry about that. But it is, of course, something that you need to bear in mind if you plan on using it for anything other than just a pure straight line racer. Overall, I'd say it's a brilliant value car. It's a non-premium model, which is a shame, so you don't get the detailed interior, etc. But it doesn't affect the car that much. The performance, as we've said, is still incredibly strong. And for a car with so much power going through the rear wheels and also so much weight, it actually handles itself really well. It handles lighter than it is, and also doesn't just constantly shred its tyres, which it could easily do with so much torque and power. And partially that is actually due to the weight, much like in the same way as a train, or particularly an old-fashioned train such as a steam train, actually gets its traction through its sheer weight. In a similar way, this car doesn't have much wheel spin, mainly because of just how much weight there is pushing the wheels down, which this car proves can sometimes be a good thing. Obviously, not necessarily around corners, but at the same time you get the payoff of not shredding your tyres constantly, so it swings and roundabouts as far as what advantages and disadvantages it produces. But overall, it's a very, very fast car, and in a straight line there are hardly any other SuperSports models which can rival it. Around twisty tracks, well, not surprisingly, I wouldn't really recommend it there, but for sheer straight line power, it's an absolute monster. It does take a little bit more tuning than many, but like the Supra or the Veyron, it really is worth the effort. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.